You know that moment when you're standing in the feed aisle, lifting another bag onto your cart, and you think, there has to be a better way than this. You're spending hundreds of dollars a year on feed. You're watching your chickens scatter half of it across the ground like they're playing some expensive game. You're doing the math on cost per egg and wondering if backyard chickens are even worth it anymore. It's exhausting. It's expensive. And here's what most people miss. It's completely unnecessary. 3 years ago, I stopped buying feed entirely. My chickens are healthier, my eggs are better, and I've saved over $1,400 while reclaiming my weekends. The difference isn't luck or land, it's design. Here's what most people miss when they complain about feed costs. The problem isn't that chickens are expensive to keep. The problem is you've designed a food desert inside a fence and then wondered why you're stuck buying expensive solutions forever. Think about it. Wild chickens didn't survive on cracked corn and soy pellets shipped from a mill 3 states away. They foraged. They scratched through leaf litter for insects. They pecked at seeds from grasses. They nibbled greens growing wild in their territory. They found grubs under logs, beetles in compost piles, worms after rain. For 8,000 years, chickens fed themselves by moving through diverse landscapes where food was everywhere if you knew how to look. Then we fenced them into bare dirt lots, removed every food source, and handed them a bag of processed feed as the only option. And now, you're surprised it's expensive and repetitive. But here's the reality most backyard chicken keepers never hear. That system isn't inevitable. It's a design choice. Specifically, it's a bad design choice that benefits feed companies, not you. They want you dependent on monthly purchases. They want you thinking chickens can't survive without their product. They've built an entire industry around the idea that modern chickens require modern feed, and you've accepted it because everyone else has too. Meanwhile, your chickens are standing in that bare run, bored, waiting for you to pour another scoop of the same pellets they've eaten for years. They're not thriving, they're surviving, and you're paying premium prices for survival mode eggs. Here's where this gets interesting. Your backyard can grow chicken food year-round. Not some of their food. Most of their food. Possibly all of it, depending on your space and commitment. You just need to stop thinking lawn and start thinking edible ecosystem. Stop thinking ornamental garden and start thinking integrated food system. The moment you shift from my yard is separate from my chickens to my yard is my chicken's food supply, everything changes. You're not adding more work. You're redesigning the work you're already doing so it pays dividends instead of requiring constant inputs. This is the part that will probably surprise you. The shift isn't complicated. It's just different from what the feed store trained you to believe was normal. Let me show you what changes when you design the food system first, when you understand what chickens actually need and how to grow it in the space you already have. When you stop being a feed store customer and start being a systems engineer who designs relationships instead of buying solutions. Because 3 years ago, I made this shift. I stopped buying feed. I planted a food forest for my flock. And now my chickens eat better than they ever did on commercial pellets. My eggs have thick shells and dark orange yolks. And I've saved over $1,400 while spending less time managing their system than I used to spend driving to the feed store and hauling bags. This isn't about going back to some romanticized pre-industrial homestead where you're grinding grain by hand and living like it's 1850. This is about applying observation-based ecology to a modern backyard and letting relationships between plants, soil, insects, and chickens do the work you've been doing manually. It's about designing once and harvesting continuously instead of buying repeatedly and watching half of it get wasted. Now let's talk about what chickens actually eat when you let the system work. They need 4 main categories: insects for protein, greens for vitamins and minerals, seeds and grains for carbohydrates and fat, and roughage for digestion. Commercial feed tries to cram all of this into one processed pellet. Your yard can grow all of it as living, fresh food that chickens prefer. And here's the kicker. Once you plant these systems, they keep producing with minimal input from you. Start with perennial fodder plants. These are your workhorses because you plant them once and harvest for years. Comfrey is the champion here. Each established plant produces massive leaves packed with protein. You can cut comfrey 4 to 5 times per growing season, and one decent patch feeds 6 chickens through summer. Chop the leaves, toss them in the run, and watch your chickens devour them. Comfrey roots go deep, mining minerals from subsoil that shallow-rooted plants can't reach, which means those leaves are nutrient-dense in ways store-bought greens never achieve. You're not buying bags of dried greens. You're harvesting fresh leaves that chickens actually want. Amaranth is your second power plant. It grows fast, self-seeds aggressively, and gives you 2 harvests. Chickens eat the tender greens all season long. Then in fall, those massive seed heads mature, and you can either let chickens harvest them directly or cut and store them for winter feeding. One amaranth plant produces thousands of seeds. Plant a 10-foot row once, and you'll have volunteer amaranth feeding your flock for years without replanting. Perennial grains give you the same plant once harvest forever advantage. Things like perennial wheat or intermediate wheatgrass. These establish slowly, but once mature, they produce grain heads that chickens can harvest themselves if you let them into the bed at the right time. You're not buying seed. You're not processing grain. You're opening a gate and letting chickens do what they've done for millennia, eat seeds directly from the source. But here's where the system gets really elegant. And this is something most people completely miss. You're not just growing food. You're growing food that builds soil while it feeds chickens. Every time you chop comfrey and toss it to your flock, you're cycling nutrients. Every time amaranth drops seeds, you're creating future food without replanting. The system feeds itself forward. That's the magic of designing with perennials instead of buying annual inputs. Now let's talk about protein, because this is where people panic. They think chickens need that 16% protein feed, or egg production will crash. But here's what most people miss. Insects are 50 to 70% protein, and your yard can produce them by the thousands if you design the habitat. This isn't theoretical. This is basic ecology working in your favor. Deep mulch is your first insect factory. Lay down 6 inches of wood chips, leaves, or straw in a section of your run. Beetles, larvae, and other decomposers move in immediately. Chickens scratch through it daily, self-harvesting fresh protein, while aerating the mulch and speeding decomposition. You're not buying dried mealworms from a pet store at $30 a pound. You're letting your yard grow them for free. Log piles are your second protein source. Stack old logs or thick branches in a corner. Keep them moist and wait. Grubs, beetles, and other wood-boring insects colonize the pile. Chickens will work those logs for months, flipping bark, pecking into soft spots, finding protein-rich larvae. One decaying log pile can feed 4 chickens for an entire year. You set it up once. It produces continuously. Compost is your third insect zone, and this is where the system becomes almost comically productive. Your kitchen scraps go into a compost pile. Those scraps attract flies. Flies lay eggs. Maggots hatch and feed on the decomposing material. Chickens smell this happening and come running. You let them scratch through the compost every few days, and they harvest fresh maggots while turning your compost for you. You're not wasting food scraps. You're converting them into insect protein that feeds chickens that give you eggs. The circle closes. Think about this for a second. You took waste, turned it into protein, harvested eggs, and built soil fertility in one integrated loop. That's systems thinking replacing purchased inputs. Seasonal rotation takes this even further. After you harvest a garden bed, let your chickens in. They'll clean up pest insects, eat weed seeds, scratch through crop residue, and fertilize the soil for next season. They're doing pest control, weeding, composting, and fertilization in one pass. Meanwhile, they're eating. You're not buying feed to support this work. The work itself is feeding them. Plant some sunflowers along your fence line. Chickens won't touch the growing plants, but when those seed heads mature and fall, you've got hundreds of high-fat seeds. Cut the heads, hang them in the coop, and let chickens peck at them through winter. One row of sunflowers produces enough seed to supplement a small flock for months. You planted once. You're harvesting for an entire season. Here's the part that really drives this home. You're not buying a $35 bag that's half wasted and gone in 3 weeks. You're harvesting food that grows itself. Comfrey regrows after every cut. Amaranth reseeds itself. Insects breed continuously in your mulch and log piles. Sunflowers bloom and seed every year. Once you plant these systems, they keep producing. The first year you're planting and establishing while still buying some feed. That's normal. You're building the foundation. The second year, you're harvesting regularly. By the third year, the system is mature and running itself, and you're spending 30 minutes a week tossing comfrey leaves and managing rotations instead of hauling feed bags every month and watching your money get scratched into the mud. Now, here's where people get stuck. They say, I only have a 20 by 20 run, or what about winter, or my HOA won't let me turn my yard into a farm. Fair enough. Let's talk about how you adapt this system to real constraints without abandoning the core principle that got you interested in the first place. Small spaces require intensity, not acreage. You can grow vertical. Sprouted grain fodder systems fit in a garage or shed. You soak barley or wheat for 24 hours, then grow it in trays for 6 to 8 days until you've got dense green mats of sprouts. 1 pound of dry grain becomes 6 to 8 pounds of fresh fodder. Your chickens eat the whole thing, roots and all. A small rack system produces enough fodder to feed 4 chickens year-round, and it takes up less space than a bookshelf. You're essentially growing fresh greens indoors in winter when nothing grows outside. This isn't complicated. It's strategic. Container-grown comfrey and amaranth work in tight spaces. 5-gallon buckets on a patio. Window boxes along a fence line. Anywhere you can fit soil and sun. These plants don't care if they're in the ground or in containers. They produce the same leaves and seeds. Stack containers vertically if you're really space limited. One 3-tier vertical garden can produce enough comfrey to supplement 2 chickens through the growing season. Log piles fit in corners. Even a small run has corners that aren't doing anything productive. Stack 3 or 4 logs there, keep them shaded and moist, and you've created an insect factory in 2 square feet. Chickens will work that pile constantly. Deep mulch works in any size run. Whether you've got 400 square feet or 4,000, you can lay down 6 inches of wood chips and let beetles and larvae colonize it. The principle scales perfectly. You're not changing the biology. You're just fitting it into the space you have. But here's what most people miss about winter, and this might shock you. For winter gaps, fermentation is your answer. In late summer, you harvest surplus grain and greens. You pack them in buckets with water and a little salt. Let them ferment for 2 to 3 weeks, then seal and store. Fermented feed keeps for months and actually improves nutritionally. The lactic acid bacteria make nutrients more bioavailable, and chickens love the tangy flavor. You're not buying commercial feed for winter. You're preserving summer abundance and feeding it back during the cold months when nothing grows fresh. Store winter squash and root vegetables. One butternut squash gives you 6 to 8 servings for chickens. Chop it in half, let them peck at the flesh and seeds. Plant extra squash in summer specifically for winter chicken feed, and store them in a cool, dry space. A dozen squash can supplement 4 chickens for 2 months. You grew it. You stored it. You're feeding it back when feed prices are highest and your garden is dormant. Here's the part people worry about most. Will egg production stay strong without commercial feed? Yes, if you design for nutritional diversity instead of trying to replicate a factory formula. Eggs stay strong because you're mimicking natural diversity. Protein comes from insects, which are 50 to 70% protein and more bioavailable than soy meal. Greens provide vitamins and minerals that keep shells thick and yolks dark orange. Seeds and grains give carbohydrates and fats for energy. Chickens scratching through compost get minerals, grit, and probiotics from the soil organisms they ingest. This isn't a science experiment. This is how chickens ate for thousands of years before feed companies convinced you they needed a proprietary blend. My 12 hens in a 400 square foot run get 80% of their diet from on-site production during the growing season. That's comfrey, amaranth, insects from mulch and log piles, and garden rotation access. Winter drops to about 50% on-site because perennial production slows. I supplement with fermented grain and stored squash. Egg production stays consistent year-round, and shell quality is better than when I fed commercial pellets. Better, not worse. What about HOA restrictions or neighbors who don't want to see a messy backyard? Disguise the system as ornamental landscaping. Sunflowers look decorative while producing seed heads for chickens. Nasturtiums are beautiful flowers that also attract aphids and other insects that chickens love. Plus, the leaves and flowers are edible for chickens. Herb spirals look like intentional garden design, but they're actually insect hotels and chicken greens factories. Comfrey can be tucked into perennial borders where it looks like any other large leaf plant. Amaranth varieties come in ornamental colors that look like you're growing them for aesthetics, not chicken feed. Nobody needs to know your landscaping is actually a food production system. The system works just as well when it's disguised as a pretty yard. You're not fighting your HOA. You're designing within their rules while accomplishing your goals. Here's where most people sabotage themselves, and I see this constantly. They plant 2 comfrey plants, 1 amaranth, and expect 0 feed bills next week. Don't do this. Building a self-sustaining system takes 6 to 12 months. Perennials need time to establish deep roots. Insect populations need time to build in your mulch and log piles. Chickens need time to learn that those green leaves and scratchy piles are food, especially if they've been raised on pellets their entire lives. The first year, you're planting and supplementing with purchased feed while the system matures. That's normal. You're front-loading the work so the system runs itself later. Second year, you're at 50% self-sufficient. You're harvesting comfrey regularly. Insects are abundant. Chickens know how to forage. Third year is when it clicks. I stopped buying feed entirely in year 3 because my system had matured to the point where it produced more food than my flock could eat. More, not less. Not enough plant diversity is the most common mistake. If you plant only comfrey, you'll have nutritional gaps. If you plant only amaranth, you'll have seasonal gaps. The system needs polyculture. At minimum, you need 3 perennial green sources, 2 insect production zones, and 2 seed or grain sources. That diversity covers nutritional needs and spreads production across seasons, so you're not scrambling to fill gaps when one thing stops producing. Skipping insect zones is the second mistake. People plant greens and grains but forget that chickens need protein. Without insects, egg production drops, and you'll end up buying protein supplements anyway. Deep mulch and log piles aren't optional. They're the foundation of your protein supply. Build them first, then add plants around them. No winter plan is the third mistake. Summer abundance doesn't help you in February. You need to ferment surplus grain, store squash, and dry seed heads in fall. Spend 2 weekends in September preserving food, and you'll coast through winter without feed bills. Skip this step, and you'll be back at the feed store in January wondering why the system failed when the real problem was you didn't plan for the season when nothing grows fresh. Let me give you the math on what this actually saves, because this is where it becomes impossible to ignore. Commercial feed runs $30 to $50 per month, depending on flock size and feed quality. Over 3 years, that's $1,080 to $1,800. I've spent maybe $200 on initial plants, wood chips, and containers. My return on investment hit in year 2. By year 3, I'm $1,400 ahead, and the system keeps producing without additional major expenses. That's real money you're not spending anymore. Time savings matter too. No more feed store trips every 3 weeks. No more hauling 50-pound bags from your car to the coop. No more pouring feed that gets wasted. I spend 30 minutes per week managing the system now. That's harvesting comfrey, rotating chickens into garden beds, checking mulch depth. Compare that to the hour or more per month you're spending on feed store runs, plus the daily frustration of watching expensive feed get scattered into mud. You're getting time back. 3 years ago, I stopped buying chicken feed. My egg production is 15% higher than it was on commercial feed. Shells are thicker. Yolks are darker orange. My chickens forage actively instead of standing around waiting for me to pour pellets. And I've saved over $1,400 while reclaiming hours of my life that used to go toward maintaining a broken system that benefited feed companies, not me. You're not abandoning modern tools. You're designing a self-regulating system that works with natural processes instead of fighting them. This isn't about perfection. It's about building relationships between plants, soil, insects, and chickens so the system feeds itself forward while you do something better with your weekends. Start planting perennials this spring. Build your insect zones this month. Design the system now, and by next year, you'll be harvesting instead of hauling. You're one growing season away from stopping those feed store trips forever. Your future flock is counting on the decisions you make right now. Start planting.